Unknown. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. 2200 hours. The night was so dark and heavy it felt like the air itself was pressing down on us. Somewhere out there, the insects screamed their constant song in the sticky Solomon Islands heat. I remember Private Robert Young Deere of the 164th Infantry Regiment, steady hands, quiet eyes, checking his M1 Garand one last time. We'd only been on the island for 11 days, arrived October 13th, and already found ourselves thrown into the kind of fight no one forgets. Our regiment was the first Army unit to join the Marines in taking the offensive against the Japanese. Now we stood shoulder to shoulder with those Marines, most of them still carrying the old bolt-action Springfield rifles, while we gripped our semi-automatic M1s, 8 rounds loaded and ready in each en-bloc clip. Then, through the suffocating humidity, a sound tore through the night. It was the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. A wave of voices shouting, "Banzai! Totsugeki!" from somewhere in the blackness ahead. Thousands of them. Charging. Among the attacking force was Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto of Japan's 29th Infantry Regiment, leading his men forward through the thick undergrowth. He carried a Type 38 Arisaka rifle, a long, awkward thing with a 31-inch barrel that must have been hell to swing around in that jungle. Its 5-round magazine took the old 6.5 50mm cartridges, and every shot meant working the bolt, up, back, forward, down, before firing again. Behind him, some of his newer soldiers carried the more powerful Type 99 rifles chambered for the 7.7 58mm round, but they were still bolt action. Still only 5 shots before needing to reload with stripper clips. What happened over the next 12 hours would show, clear as day, why the Americans held such a massive edge in firepower, an advantage the Japanese hadn't fully understood until that night. The difference between the semi-automatic M1 Garand and the bolt-action Arisaka wasn't just about speed. It was about industrial might and modern engineering. It was proof that innovation could decide battles just as surely as bravery could. The fight for Henderson Field would go on to underline one hard truth of the Pacific War. The Japanese fought with unmatched courage, but their weapons belonged to an earlier generation. The M1 Garand's semi-auto action, its 8-round clip, and the punch of its 30-06 cartridge gave our troops a rate of fire and stopping power the enemy simply couldn't equal. That gap in small arms performance didn't just matter here. It played out across the entire Pacific, through the steaming jungles of New Guinea, across the coral sands of Tarawa, and onto the black volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima. It was a key reason we eventually won. The M1 Garand came from the mind of a quiet genius, John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-American working at Springfield Armory since 1919. After 17 long years of experiments, redesigns, and testing, the Army finally adopted his rifle on January 9, 1936. America became the first nation in the world to give every infantryman a semi-automatic rifle as standard issue. It fired the mighty 30-06 Springfield cartridge, sending a 150-grain M2 ball round screaming downrange at nearly 850 feet per second from a 24-inch barrel, packing a muzzle energy of about 2,650 foot-pounds. What made Garand's design so brilliant was its gas-operated, rotating bolt system. A small hole near the muzzle siphoned off a bit of the gun's own gas, pushing a rod that cycled the action automatically. Pull the trigger once, and the rifle fired a round, ejected the empty case, and chambered the next shot, ready to go again without touching the bolt. A well-trained soldier could squeeze off 40 to 50 accurate shots in a minute. Compare that to the 15 or 20 you might get from a bolt-action rifle, and the difference is staggering. Reloading was fast too. Just drop in a new 8-round clip from the top, and a practiced rifleman could be ready to fire again in under 3 seconds. It hadn't been an easy road getting there, though. The early prototypes used a primer-actuated system that proved unreliable in the field. Originally, the rifle had been designed around the .276 Pedersen cartridge, a lighter round that offered less recoil and good accuracy. But in 1932, General Douglas MacArthur stepped in and made a decisive call. He ordered the Army to stick with the 30-06 Springfield cartridge. His reasoning was simple. There were already massive stockpiles of that ammunition sitting in depots all over the country, and switching calibers would have meant scrapping millions of usable rounds. That decision set the program back a bit, but in hindsight, it was the right move. The 30-06 was a powerhouse, flat-shooting, hard-hitting, and deadly accurate at long range. It gave the Garand the kind of reach and punch that soldiers came to trust their lives on. The Japanese rifles, on the other hand, had a much older story behind them. Their lineage traced all the way back to Colonel Nariakira Arisaka's first design, the Type 30 rifle of 1897. That weapon had been created to replace the outdated Murata rifles Japan's forces were still using at the time. By the outbreak of World War II, Japanese troops mostly carried two versions of Arisaka's design, the Type 38, introduced in 1905, and the Type 99, which came along in 1939, the 2599th year of the Japanese calendar. The Type 38 fired a 6.5 valve 50mm semi-rimmed cartridge, sending a 139-grain bullet downrange at about 2,500 feet per second, packing roughly 1,650 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. The newer Type 99 used a more powerful 7.7 58mm cartridge, launching a heavier 182-grain bullet at around 2,400 feet per second, generating roughly 2,300 foot-pounds of energy. Both rifles were bolt-action with internal 5-round magazines, loaded from the top with 5-round stripper clips. The Type 38 had a long, almost elegant, 31.4-inch barrel, one of the longest ever fitted to an infantry rifle. That length gave it great long-range accuracy on open terrain, but it was a nightmare in the dense jungle, where you could barely see 100 yards ahead. The Type 99 was a bit shorter, with a 25.9-inch barrel that made it more manageable, but it entered service too late to replace the older rifles in any meaningful way. Now, to their credit, the Arisaka actions were tough as nails. After the war, tests showed that their receivers could actually handle more pressure than the American Springfield, the British Lee Enfield, or even the German Mauser. The Japanese engineers had also come up with some clever features: a safety you could operate silently, and a gas venting system that protected the shooter if a cartridge ruptured. Those were smart designs, no doubt about it. But none of that changed the fundamental problem. They were still bolt-action rifles in a world that was rapidly moving towards semi-automatic firepower. That single mechanical limitation, having to work the bolt after every shot, was enough to tilt the odds on the battlefield. The industrial difference between the US and Japan became crystal clear when you looked at the numbers. From 1936 to 1945, American factories turned out about 5.4 million M1 Garand rifles. Springfield Armory alone built roughly 3.5 million, while Winchester Repeating Arms produced just over 500,000. Later, during the Korean War, International Harvester and Harrington and Richardson would join in to make even more. At the height of the war, production was staggering. Springfield Armory was cranking out 1,000 rifles a day by January 1944, and Winchester was producing around 600 daily. That kind of output meant that by the middle of 1943, just about every American infantryman and Marine in the Pacific was armed with a semi-automatic M1 Garand. The U.S. military supply system made sure frontline combat units got priority. Even the Marine Corps, which had been hesitant at first to trade their trusted Springfields for the new rifle, was receiving 22,000 Garands per month by early 1943. Once they got their hands on it, though, most Marines quickly realized they'd been handed one hell of an upgrade. By the end of the 1942 fiscal year, the Marine Corps had officially received 62,286 M1 Garands. Not all of them had made it to the front lines yet, but the Corps was well on its way to being fully equipped. The situation on the Japanese side couldn't have been more different. Between 1905 and 1945, Japan produced roughly 3 million Type 38 rifles at several arsenals: Koishikawa, later renamed Tokyo Arsenal, Kokura, Nagoya, and Mukden Arsenal in occupied Manchuria, among others. Then came the Type 99, which entered production in 1939. By the war's end in 1945, Japan had turned out about 3.5 million of those, built at 9 different facilities, including 2 outside of Japan proper, Mukden in Manchukuo and Jinsen in Korea. So yes, on paper, that's more than 6 million rifles altogether. But even with those numbers, Japan never reached the kind of industrial tempo needed to modernize its entire fighting force. By 1945, plenty of second-line troops, garrison forces, and naval infantry were still carrying the older Type 38s. That mix of rifles meant they were juggling 2 totally different ammunition types in the field, a logistical headache that just made things harder as the war dragged on. Meanwhile, American production of the M1 Garand kept humming with almost astonishing consistency. The quality never really slipped, even when factories were running full tilt. Springfield Armory had some of the strictest inspection standards in the world. If a rifle couldn't group its shots within 5 inches at 100 yards, it was flat out rejected. They also made sure every rifle was fully interchangeable. Apart from a Winchester M1 could fit perfectly into a Springfield, or vice versa. Every bolt, trigger group, and receiver was built to the same exact specs. Out in the field, that meant if your Garand broke, you could strip a part off a wrecked one nearby, pop it in, and be good to go again, no matter where either rifle had come from. In 1942, they even improved the heat treating process, which made the receivers tougher and more durable than the pre-war versions. And the surface finishes changed not to cut costs, but to make the rifles more practical. They switched from the old blued steel to a parkerized finish, which held up far better against rust and moisture, an absolute must in the steaming jungles of the Pacific. As walnut became harder to get, the stocks transitioned to birch and other hardwoods. They might have looked different, but they held up just as well. Toward the end of the war, a few parts were simplified, like stamped trigger guards replacing the heavier milled ones. But everything was tested and proven before it ever reached a soldier's hands. Function always came first. The Japanese factories, though, told a very different story. Early production of the Type 99 rifles was actually impressive, almost over-engineered in some ways. The first models had chrome-lined barrels, the first ever in a mass-issued military rifle, clever anti-aircraft sights with folding wings for leading aircraft, dust covers over the bolt to keep out grit, and even integrated wire monopods to steady the weapon while firing. They were finished in a deep blue polish, with nicely crafted hardwood stocks that fit tight and clean. But by 1944, the reality of war had stripped away nearly all of those refinements. As resources ran short and air raids battered Japanese industry, production quality fell off a cliff. The so-called last-ditch rifles were rough. Tool marks everywhere, uneven metal, and crude wood stocks that barely fit. Gone were the fancy ladder sights. In their place sat simple fixed notches. The butt plates switched from metal to plain wood, and the chrome lining disappeared altogether as chromium became scarce. Even the proud imperial chrysanthemum, the emperor's personal seal, was no longer neatly rolled into the receiver. By the final years, it was hastily stamped, sometimes crooked, a shadow of its former symbol of precision. In contrast, the M1 Garands, the M1 semi-automatic action, did more than just let you shoot faster. It changed the way you fought. After each shot, the rifle cycled on its own, and I didn't have to break my cheek weld or lose my sight picture. That meant I could pick a new target and fire a true follow-up shot far quicker than with a bolt gun. The operating rod, driven by gas tapped off near the muzzle, was built tough enough to keep working even when the whole thing was filthy. Mud, sand, volcanic ash, carbon fouling from long strings of fire. None of it stopped the Garand from cycling reliably. People sometimes mocked the en-bloc clip because of that distinctive ping when it popped out. The sound that supposedly warned the enemy you were empty. Truth is, that system gave you the fastest reload of any service rifle of the day. A practiced shooter could drop in a fresh clip in under 3 seconds. Compare that to the 5 to 7 seconds it took an expert to reload a bolt action with stripper clips, and you see the real advantage. Plus, when the clip ejected, you got an instant tactile and audible confirmation that the rifle was empty. No fumbling, no wondering if you'd misfed a round. At about 9.5 pounds, the Garand wasn't lightweight, but that mass helped tame the stout Infantry 06 cartridge. The weight absorbed recoil and made rapid, accurate follow-ups much easier. The rifle's overall length, roughly 43.6 inches, felt balanced. The heavy barrel up front and the solid wood stock back gave it a steady feel in the shoulder. Its two-stage military trigger wasn't a competition trigger, but it was predictable and something a soldier could learn to trust with practice. The Arisakas, solid and well-made though they were, suffered from the same fundamental problem: bolt action. After you fired, you had to run the bolt through a series of 4 deliberate moves: lift the handle, pull it back to yank out the spent case, shove it forward to strip a fresh round, then rotate the handle down to lock it. That sequence broke your firing position, messed with your sight alignment, and even a trained man took 2 to 3 seconds to complete it. In close, chaotic fighting, that could be the difference between life and death. And then there was the Type 38's ridiculous length, about 50.3 inches overall. In the open it might have been a tack-sharp rifle, but in the jungle it was a liability. Vines snagged it. It was slow to bring to bear on a sudden target, and swinging it around in dense foliage was downright awkward. You didn't want that in a fight where most engagements happened inside 100 yards. That extra-long barrel on the Type 38 might have been great for accuracy across open fields, but in the jungles and bunkers of the Pacific, it was a curse. In those fights, most engagements happened inside 100 yards, sometimes close enough to shout at each other. The long rifle was clumsy, hard to maneuver, and nearly useless in tight quarters or fortified positions. The 5-round magazine didn't help either. Japanese soldiers had to reload about 60% more often than we did just to keep up the same rate of fire. Reloading with stripper clips was a slow, deliberate dance. You had to open the bolt, seat the clip just right, press the rounds down into the magazine, pull the clip out, and then close the bolt. Under perfect range conditions, it might take 5 to 7 seconds, but in the chaos of combat, or while lying in the mud behind cover, it took much longer. The 3006 Springfield cartridge we used in the M1 Garand was already the backbone of American small arms. The same round fed the old M1903 Springfield rifle, the M1917 and M1919 Browning machine guns, and the Browning automatic rifle. That kind of standardization made logistics a dream. One type of ammo worked across rifles, automatics, and machine guns alike. The 3006 was rimless too, which meant it fed smoothly from clips, belts, and magazines. No snagging, no jamming. And the sheer scale of U.S. ammunition production was staggering. By 1943, the Lake City Army ammunition plant alone could turn out 200 million rounds a year. Add in Frankfurt Arsenal, Denver Ordnance Plant, and others, and you were talking about hundreds of millions more. And the quality, rock solid. Every batch of M2 ball ammo had to stay within 40 feet per second of the standard muzzle velocity. That meant when you pulled the trigger, your round performed exactly how you expected it to, every time. The Japanese had it tougher. Units equipped with the Type 38 rifles used the 6.5x 50 mm semi-rimmed cartridge, while those carrying the newer Type 99s needed 7.7 58 mm rounds. The smaller 6.5 mm kicked less and let soldiers carry more ammo, but it lacked the punch to deal with fortified positions or thick cover. The 7.7 mm fixed that problem, but now the Army had to supply 2 completely different calibers. That dual-caliber setup was a logistical nightmare. There are records of the 23rd Infantry Regiment on Guadalcanal receiving 7.7 mm ammo for their Type 38 rifles, completely useless. Both the guns and the ammo ended up dead weight. Mix-ups like that happened again in the Philippines and on scattered island garrisons. To make matters worse, the semi-rimmed design of the 6.5 mm round sometimes caused feeding issues, especially in the tropics where the heat and humidity corroded cartridges fast. So when the 164th Infantry Regiment, a North Dakota National Guard outfit, landed on Guadalcanal on October 13, 1942, they brought something the Marines had been praying for: M1 Garand rifles. At that point, most Marines were still armed with the old M1903 Springfield bolt actions. I remember the looks on their faces, part envy, part curiosity, as they watched the Army guys unload those shiny semi-automatics. 2 weeks later, during the brutal battle for Henderson Field on October 24th and 25th, nobody doubted the Garand anymore. The difference was night and day. Staff Sergeant Mitchell Page, a Marine machine gunner who fought alongside the men of the 164th, saw firsthand what those rifles could do. Private First Class James Cass from Company M later told it best. The Japs came at us in waves, barely visible in the darkness except for the glint of their bayonets. With our Garands, we could put 8 rounds into them before they covered 30 yards. Each man was like his own machine gun section. We'd fire, the rifle would cycle itself, and we'd fire again. No working a bolt, no losing sight of the target. Just squeeze, boom, squeeze, boom, 8 times before reloading. As the night went on, the 164th's companies were thrown into the line piecemeal, reinforcing the Marines wherever the Japanese attacks hit hardest. The Marines' line had started to buckle under the relentless Japanese assault, but the arrival of fresh Army troops, their M1 Garands roaring through the night, turned the tide. The steady, punishing rhythm of semi-automatic fire helped stabilize what had nearly become a collapse. Colonel Bryant Moore, commanding the 164th Infantry, later reported that his men had fired more than 250,000 rounds of .30-06 ammunition in just 2 days. When dawn broke, the ground in front of their positions was littered with Japanese dead, most cut down by the fast, accurate fire of the Garands. Marine Private Robert Leckie, who would later write Helmet for My Pillow, watched the Army men in action. "We thought they were green," he admitted, "these dog faces with their newfangled rifles. But when the Japs charged, those Garands spoke with a voice we'd never heard before. It wasn't the sharp crack of our Springfields. It was a continuous roar." Across the battlefield, Sergeant Masao Watanabe of Japan's 29th Infantry Regiment somehow survived the October offensive. In his post-war memoir, later found in the archives, he wrote, "We were told the Americans were soft, that our Yamato spirit would overcome their machines. Our officers said one Japanese soldier was worth 10 Americans. But that night when we charged their lines, it was like running into a wall of lead. Every American seemed to have an automatic weapon. Our Arisaka rifles, the same kind our fathers used in the Russo-Japanese War, felt like antiques. We'd fire once, duck behind cover to work the bolt, and by the time we fired again, they'd already shot 5 rounds. Watanabe went on to describe how tactics that had once crushed poorly equipped Chinese forces proved suicidal against American firepower. The banzai charges that once scattered conscripts now melted under the unbroken storm of M1 fire. "We couldn't even get close enough to use our bayonets," he wrote. "Our courage meant nothing when we were being cut down 50 meters from their lines." Another Japanese officer, Lieutenant Hiroshi Takahashi of the 230th Infantry Regiment, echoed the same in a letter later recovered from his body. "The American automatic rifles are devastating. Each man fires as fast as our light machine guns. When we advance, it sounds like we're charging a wall of guns. Our men fall before they can even work the bolt for a second shot." By the end of 1943, the lesson had spread across the Pacific. At Cape Gloucester, during the torrential landings on New Britain, the Marines of the 1st Marine Division, now fully equipped with M1 Garands, brought that firepower with them into some of the worst fighting of the war. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, who later wrote With the Old Breed, remembered it vividly. "That Garand was the most reliable piece of equipment we had. In rain that came down like waterfalls and mud that tried to swallow you whole, that rifle never quit. The Japs with their bolt actions couldn't match our rate of fire. When they tried to set up in the jungle, we'd pour so much lead into the trees that the leaves fell like rain. Even Sergeant John Basilone, who earned the Medal of Honor on Guadalcanal for his heroics with machine guns, carried an M1 Garand into battle whenever he could. He trusted it the way a man trusts a friend he's gone through hell with. Sergeant John Basilone carried that M1 Garand as his personal rifle. He once said, "The Garand gave every Marine the firepower of 3 men with bolt-action rifles." In the jungle, where you might only see the enemy for a split second, being able to fire multiple shots without touching a bolt could mean the difference between killing him or him living long enough to kill you later. He wasn't exaggerating. During the Battle of Saipan in June 1944, the Japanese launched the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War, more than 3,000 soldiers storming American positions in a desperate pre-dawn attack. On July 7th, Private First Class Harold Agerholm of the 4th Marine Division, armed with his trusty Garand, stood his ground as wave after wave came at them. Corporal John Miller, who fought beside him, later said, "They came at us shoulder to shoulder, screaming like banshees. Our Garands never stopped firing. As fast as we could pull the trigger, we fired. The ping of empty clips popping out was constant, like some kind of deadly music. The Japs with their bolt guns didn't stand a chance. They'd get 1 shot off, maybe 2, before our semi-autos cut them down." By Peleliu in September 1944, the Japanese had learned from those earlier bloodbaths. They no longer charged recklessly in the open. Instead, they fought from fortified caves and tunnels, turning the island into a maze of fire. Even then, the bolt-action Arisakas were no match. Marine Corporal R.V. Bergen remembered, "When we spotted a position, we'd just drench it with rifle fire. 4 or 5 of us with Garands could pump 40 rounds into a cave mouth in the time it took them to fire 5 or 6 shots back. We'd keep their heads down while the flamethrower guys or demo teams moved in." That kind of coordination came from training, and we trained hard. Back home, at places like Fort Benning, Camp Perry, and dozens of other bases, recruits spent weeks mastering the M1 Garand. The Army's Field Manual 23.5, U.S. Rifle Caliber 30, M1 laid it all out clearly. A trained soldier should be able to fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute in combat. We drilled that constantly, firing, keeping our sight picture, maintaining alignment between shots, and learning to re-engage targets fast without losing focus. The semi-automatic action meant you never had to break position. You just fired, watched the impact, adjusted, and fired again. Ammunition for training was generous too. Basic trainees fired at least 210 rounds during qualification, with plenty more for advanced work. Once we were prepping for deployment, it wasn't unusual to go through thousands of rounds per man. That kind of repetition built muscle memory and confidence. 2 things you can't fake in a firefight. The Marine Corps, at first, hadn't been so sure about the Garand. They worried the semi-auto action would waste ammo and ruin the Corps' proud marksmanship standards. But after Guadalcanal, they changed their tune fast. The Marines developed their own intensive training programs, focusing on what they called accurate volume of fire. It wasn't spray and pray shooting. Every shot was aimed, fast, deliberate, and deadly. They made sure the rifle's rapid-fire capability enhanced their legendary accuracy, not replaced it. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Army clung to its traditional philosophy, rooted in the old samurai ideals of precision and discipline. Their doctrine taught Ichigeki Hisatsu, 1 shot, 1 kill. It was both a spiritual creed and a practical limitation of their bolt-action rifles. Japanese infantrymen spent endless hours training for long-range marksmanship, where the Type 38's accuracy truly shined. But their manuals said it all. The spirit of the attack must be the infantryman's primary weapon. The rifle and bayonet are only extensions of the warrior's will. That kind of thinking, that courage alone could overcome technology, turned out to be a fatal mistake. You can't charge spirit first into automatic fire. They also drilled relentlessly with bayonets, moving through cat-like attack forms, lunging and slashing in daily practice. The Type 38's long reach gave them an edge in close combat on paper, but in the jungles of the Pacific, That theory fell apart. There was rarely room to swing a rifle like a spear, and the fight was over long before anyone got that close. The jungles of Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and all the other island battlefields offered no clear lines of sight, just tangled foliage, mud, and shadows. The kind of long-range marksmanship the Japanese had trained for simply didn't exist there. Most of the time, you could barely see 20 yards in any direction. The banzai charges that had once crushed poorly equipped Chinese or colonial troops now ran headfirst into a wall of semi-automatic rifle fire. The roar of hundreds of M1 Garands firing in unison became its own kind of psychological weapon. That steady, rhythmic crack of rapid shots, punctuated by the sharp metallic ping of empty clips ejecting, rattled even the bravest soldiers. In fact, a captured Japanese training manual from 1943 warned recruits, "The American automatic rifles create a sound like many machine guns firing. Do not be discouraged by this volume of fire. Remember your spiritual superiority and press forward with determination." But spiritual superiority doesn't stop bullets. Japanese prisoner Yukio Nakamura, captured on Saipan, told interrogators, "We were taught that Americans were weak, that they hid behind machines instead of fighting with true spirit. But their rifles never stopped firing. It was like fighting against machines, not men. Our officers shouted for us to charge with bayonets, but we were cut down before we ever got close." For the Americans, that same sound, that controlled thunder of semi-automatic fire, built confidence. Marine Corporal James Russell put it best. Knowing you could throw 8 rounds downrange as fast as you could pull the trigger made you feel invincible. When the Japs charged, you didn't panic. You just started shooting and didn't stop until they did, or until you heard that ping telling you to reload. That firepower advantage didn't just boost morale, it completely reshaped squad-level tactics. A standard American rifle squad of 12 men, 10 armed with M1 Garands and 2 carrying Browning automatic rifles, could pour out 400 to 500 aimed rounds per minute in sustained fire. A comparable Japanese squad with Arisaka rifles could barely reach 150 to 180 rounds, even with well-trained soldiers working their bolts at full speed. That difference was everything. American squads could truly fire and maneuver, one team laying down suppressive fire while the other advanced. The sheer volume and accuracy of the Garand's fire kept enemy heads buried, letting U.S. troops close in and finish the job. Japanese squads didn't have that luxury. Their slower bolt actions couldn't generate enough covering fire, which made it nearly impossible to move once the shooting started. Scale that up to a company, and the contrast became overwhelming. A U.S. rifle company of about 200 men could unleash devastating defensive fire against any assault. During the October 24-25 battle for Henderson Field, the 164th Infantry Regiment proved it beyond question. Company G alone reported firing 30,000 rounds of .30-06 in one night, about 150 rounds per man, and they held their ground with only light casualties. The math was brutal. A Japanese battalion of 800 men charging those positions faced companies capable of sending 8,000 aimed rounds per minute their way. Darkness, confusion, fear, none of it mattered when you were walking into that kind of fire. Human courage simply couldn't survive it. That overwhelming advantage was one of the key reasons America's island-hopping campaign worked. When U.S. Brua forces landed on Japanese-held beaches, they knew they could dig in, hold fast, and repel counterattacks until reinforcements arrived. The Garand gave smaller American units the ability to defend larger areas, which meant faster buildups and quicker breakouts during every phase of the Pacific War. From Tarawa to Kwajalein, from Eniwetok to Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and finally Okinawa. The pattern repeated itself again and again. Japanese troops, unable to match American firepower, turned from banzai charges to fortified defenses, caves, bunkers, and tunnels, anything to blunt the M1's killing efficiency. But even then, their bolt-action rifles limited what they could do. Whenever an American exposed himself to move or throw a grenade, a Japanese rifleman had just one slow shot to take, maybe 2, before having to work the bolt again. Against semi-automatic fire, that pause was deadly. Japan's insistence on keeping the bolt-action rifle went all the way back to the pride born from their victory in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. Back then, it made sense. The Arisaka had performed well, and Japan's doctrine still believed that discipline and courage, the spirit of the warrior, would always triumph over material advantage. But by the 1940s, the battlefield had changed, and so had the weapons. The rest of the world was fighting a modern war. Japan was still bringing a rifle from the last one. Back in the Russo-Japanese War, things were very different. Japanese infantry, armed with the Type 30 and Type 35 Arisaka rifles, had beaten the Russians through discipline, training, and clever tactics. Victories like Mukden and the Siege of Port Arthur seemed to prove that Japanese willpower, their so-called warrior spirit, could triumph over superior material power. But that early success blinded Japan's military to the changes that followed. Many of the officers running the army in the 1930s had fought in that earlier war. They saw it as Japan's great moment, the proof that courage and discipline could overcome anything. What they failed to see was that warfare itself had evolved. World War I had already shown that firepower, not spirit, not courage, ruled the modern battlefield. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery had changed everything. But Japan, which hadn't fought much in that war, never absorbed those lessons. The Americans did. The M1 Garand was born out of lessons learned the hard way in France. General John J. Pershing, who commanded the American Expeditionary Force in World War I, saw firsthand what automatic weapons could do. In 1918 he wrote, "The soldier who can deliver the most accurate fire in the shortest time will dominate the battlefield of the future." That idea became a guiding principle, and it set the wheels in motion for a new kind of rifle. For nearly 20 years, America invested time, money, and engineering talent into turning that vision into reality. There were endless tests, redesigns, and production trials. By 1936, when the M1 Garand was officially adopted, the U.S. hadn't just built a better rifle, it had built an entire system to produce, maintain, and supply it on a massive scale. Japan, to its credit, eventually realized it needed to modernize too. In the 1930s, Japanese designers began working on their own semi-automatic rifles. One of them, the Type Ko rifle, came from engineer Kijiro Nambu, who also developed several gas-operated prototypes, but the Army gave those projects low priority. Most of the country's limited resources went into building planes, ships, and other prestige weapons instead. By the time Japan tried to directly copy the Garand, it was too late. The resulting Type 4 rifle, often incorrectly called the Type 5, was a near replica of the M1, chambered in Japan's 7.7mm cartridge and fed from a 10-round internal magazine using two 5-round stripper clips. It proved they understood the value of the design, but they simply didn't have the factories or raw materials to mass produce it. In the end, only about 250 part sets were ever made, and maybe 100 to 125 rifles were actually assembled before the war ended. The difference between the two nations' firepower could almost be reduced to math. The M1 Garand, firing standard M2 ball ammunition, generated 2,656 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. A well-trained soldier could fire around 40 aimed shots per minute, delivering roughly 106,000 foot-pounds of energy every minute. Now compare that to a Type 99 Arisaka, firing the 7.7mm round with about 2,300 foot-pounds of energy per shot. Even at an optimistic 15 rounds per minute, that was just 3,500 foot-pounds per minute, less than one-third the output of a Garand in skilled hands. Even ballistics favored the American round. The 30-06 Springfield's trajectory had a bit more drop at extreme ranges compared to the lighter 6.5mm Arisaka, but in the real world, the jungles, hills, and broken terrain of the Pacific, it was deadlier where it counted. At 300 yards, which was already a long shot in those conditions, the 30-06 dropped just 13.5 inches. well within the rifleman's skill to correct. At 300 yards, the 30.06 round from the M1 Garand still carried about 1,900 foot-pounds of energy, even after dropping 13.5 inches from the line of sight. That was enough punch to tear through layers of jungle brush, palm fronds, and even thin cover, and still drop an enemy soldier behind it. The 6.5mm Arisaka, by comparison, dropped a little less, about 11 inches at the same range, but its lighter bullet only carried around 1,100 foot-pounds of energy by the time it got there. In real combat, that often meant it couldn't penetrate trees, logs, or sandbag cover effectively. U.S. Army ordnance tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground in 1940 proved what the troops were already learning firsthand. In controlled trials, soldiers using M1 Garands averaged 24 aimed shots per minute at 200 yards, hitting 90% of man-sized targets. Men firing M1903 Springfields, which functioned almost exactly like the Japanese Arisaka, managed just 10 aimed shots per minute with 85% accuracy. In rapid-fire drills meant to simulate surprise attacks, Garand users could engage 3 separate targets in the same time it took a bolt-action shooter to hit just one. And over longer stretches of fire, the difference only grew. After 5 minutes of sustained shooting, M1 riflemen still maintained about 80% of their starting rate of fire. The bolt-action shooters, on the other hand, slowed to 60%, worn down by the constant motion of working the bolt. The Garand demanded nothing more than a squeeze of the trigger. The Arisaka required a full arm and shoulder movement for every single round. That difference showed up clearly in the field. On Guadalcanal, Army troops equipped with Garands burned through 150 to 200 rounds per man, per day during heavy fighting. The Marines, still using Springfields at the time, fired only 60 to 80 rounds per man under similar conditions. That wasn't waste, it was opportunity. The M1 allowed soldiers to actually hit more fleeting targets, to respond faster, and to dominate the fight. Japanese troops, by contrast, fired far less, usually 40 to 50 rounds per man per day, partly because their ammo supply was limited, but also because the bolt-action system physically restricted how much lead they could throw downrange. Captured Japanese after-action reports often blamed ammunition shortages. But even when ammo was available, they simply couldn't shoot fast enough to use it. By late 1942, the Japanese command was well aware of what they were up against. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, who led the 17th Army on Guadalcanal, wrote in a November report, "Enemy rifle fire has density and accuracy beyond our expectations. Each enemy soldier appears to be armed with an automatic weapon. Our forces cannot achieve fire superiority even with numerical advantage. Recommend emphasis on night operations and infiltration tactics to negate enemy firepower." By 1944, official doctrine began to reflect that grim reality. The instructions for the decisive battle issued to the defenders of the Mariana Islands warned, "The enemy's automatic rifles and machine guns create an impenetrable wall of fire during daylight. All attacks must be conducted at night or under cover of adverse weather. Daytime movement invites annihilation." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the brilliant and pragmatic commander who defended Iwo Jima, echoed the same sentiment in January 1945. The American automatic rifles are remarkable weapons. Each soldier possesses firepower equal to 3 or 4 of our riflemen. We must not waste lives in futile banzai charges against such firepower. Instead, we will make them pay for every meter of ground from fortified positions. Kuribayashi's strategy of defense in depth, trading ground for blood rather than charging head-on, extended the fight and inflicted heavy losses on U.S. forces. But even he knew it couldn't change the outcome. Industrial might and superior weaponry simply outweighed courage and conviction. Japan tried to make up the gap in firepower. In 1942, they introduced the Type 100 submachine gun, their first real attempt to give infantry automatic capability. It fired the small 8mm Nambu pistol cartridge, which was underpowered and lacked range. Production barely topped 27,000 guns before the war ended, nowhere near enough to make a difference. More telling, though, was Japan's desperate attempt to copy the Garand itself. When American troops captured the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in 1945, they stumbled onto something remarkable: Japan's secret attempt to copy the M1 Garand. Engineers there had been quietly reverse engineering captured rifles, redesigning them to fire Japan's 7.7mm cartridge and feed from a 10-round internal magazine, loaded with 2 standard 5-round stripper clips. They'd even tried to improve on the American design, adding a rubber recoil pad for comfort and a bolt hold-open feature that locked back after the last round. On paper, it was a solid weapon. But in reality, Japan's industry just couldn't mass-produce something so complex. They built parts for about 250 rifles, but only 100 to 125 were ever fully assembled before the war ended. The so-called Type 4 rifle was proof that Japanese engineers understood exactly what made the Garand so effective. They just didn't have the industrial muscle to bring it to life on any meaningful scale. But the problem wasn't only technical, it was cultural. Japanese military doctrine still placed spirit above steel. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, a staff officer who served across several campaigns, wrote after the war, "We knew the Americans had superior weapons, but to admit it openly would have destroyed morale. We had to keep faith in spiritual superiority, even as our soldiers were cut down by American automatic weapons. That mindset shaped everything, even training." As late as 1944, Japanese infantry courses still focused heavily on bayonet drills and night infiltration tactics, while marksmanship barely got a mention. The official infantry manual devoted only 3 pages to shooting, but 12 pages to spiritual preparation and hand-to-hand combat. It was a philosophy rooted in the past, one that no amount of courage could make work against modern firepower. The Battle of Okinawa, from April through June 1945, proved that once and for all. Right on Japan's doorstep, 180,000 American troops faced about 120,000 Japanese defenders in what became the bloodiest battle of the Pacific. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, had learned from the disasters at Saipan and Peleliu. There were no more banzai charges. Instead, his men built vast networks of bunkers, tunnels, and strongholds carved into Okinawa's limestone ridges. Even so, the old limitations of the bolt-action Arisaka rifle remained fatal. When American units advanced, Japanese soldiers simply couldn't put out enough fire to stop them. Private First Class Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector medic who earned the Medal of Honor, later described what it sounded like on those killing hills. "The Garands were firing so fast it sounded like one continuous roar. Our boys could keep the Japanese pinned down while I went out to bring back the wounded. If they'd all had bolt-action rifles like the Japanese, I never could have saved those men." On May 4, 1945, the Japanese launched their only major counterattack of the Okinawa campaign. About 5,000 troops stormed American lines before dawn in an effort to break through to the rear areas. The assault began at 0430 hours with the heaviest artillery barrage the Japanese ever managed in the Pacific. 12,000 shells in just 30 minutes. Then, their infantry surged forward. Private First Class Martin Brennan of the 17th Infantry Regiment remembered it clearly. "They came at us in waves, not the wild banzai charges we'd seen before, but organized, coordinated attacks with real fire support. Still, our Garands never stopped. 8 shots, ping, reload, 8 more. The noise was incredible. The Japanese with their bolt actions would fire once, maybe twice, before our semi-auto fire cut them down. The assault broke apart under the sheer volume of American firepower, leaving the ground littered with bodies. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers were killed in that single counterattack, while U.S. casualties totaled just 714. The rapid, relentless fire of thousands of M1 Garands, backed by automatic weapons and artillery, created killing fields where bravery alone couldn't bridge the gap. Even when Japanese troops reached our lines, the Garand's close-range power decided the fight. Sergeant William Manchester, who would later become a respected historian, fought on Okinawa with the 29th Marines. He remembered it vividly. The M1 rifle was our best friend. In the chaos of close combat, being able to fire 8 times without working a bolt saved countless American lives. I saw Japanese soldiers trying to work their bolts under fire, hands shaking, fumbling with the mechanism, while our boys just kept pulling the trigger. By that stage of the war, everyone understood what the Garand meant. It wasn't just a weapon, it was survival. When planners began preparing for Operation Downfall, the proposed invasion of Japan itself, they assumed the M1 Garand would again be the backbone of the assault. The first phase, Operation Olympic, was scheduled for November 1945, and every calculation showed that overwhelming firepower would be essential to break the expected resistance. The numbers were staggering. The War Department projected the need for 500,000 replacement M1 rifles just for the invasion. By August 1945, Springfield Armory and Winchester were expected to be producing a combined 2,000 rifles a day, with International Harvester gearing up as a third manufacturer. And then there was the ammunition. Planners estimated that invasion troops alone would need 100 million rounds of .36 every month, just for rifle use. It was a testament to how much fire the Army expected each Garand-equipped soldier to put out in combat. Intelligence reports suggested Japan still had about 2.5 million Arisaka rifles in military service, plus millions more issued to hastily formed civilian militias. But many of those were little more than relics, training rifles, obsolete models, or crudely made single-shot weapons. The Type 99 substitute standard rifles being churned out in 1945 were so rough that American analysts questioned whether they were even safe to fire. Invasion planning assumed that each beachhead would have to be softened by naval bombardment and aerial bombing, followed by ground assaults where the Garand's firepower would carry the day. Studies of earlier battles showed a clear pattern. American forces armed with semi-automatic rifles suffered about 40% fewer casualties than those projected for troops still using bolt actions in similar conditions. The Japanese, realizing they could never match that firepower, prepared instead for a war of desperation. They planned to rely on suicide tactics, civilian human shields, and brutal close quarters fighting in cities and caves where rifles would be less effective. Documents found after the war revealed plans that bordered on madness. Bamboo spears for civilians, suicide swimmers armed with explosives, and even schemes to unleash biological weapons against invading troops. By then, the once proud Arisaka rifle, the symbol of Japan's early military strength, had become just one part of a desperate, doomed defense. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war before Operation Downfall could ever begin. Post-war studies estimated that if the invasion had gone forward, American casualties might have reached 500,000 to 1 million, with Japanese losses in the millions. The M1 Garand's firepower would have been critical, but the human cost would have been unimaginable. When the war finally ended, the M1 Garand stood as more than just a rifle. It was a symbol of what industrial innovation, mass production, and solid design could accomplish. Its success reshaped infantry warfare and influenced weapon development around the world. The Soviet Union, which had struggled to mass-produce its own SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle during the war, took notice, and soon after began developing the weapon that would change everything, the AK-47. After the war, the M1 Garand's influence rippled across the world. The Soviets, studying captured rifles and battlefield reports, created the SKS carbine, a design directly inspired by the Garand's semi-automatic operation. China followed suit with the Type 56 carbine, essentially a copy of the Soviet SKS. France built the MAS-49, blending Garand lessons with their own pre-war experiments in self-loading rifles. Even Britain, long content with their trusty Lee Enfields, began working on semi-automatic prototypes almost immediately after the war ended. Across Europe, nations like Belgium with the FN-49, Switzerland with the STW-57, and Italy with the BM-59 all took cues from America's success. The M1 Garand didn't fade after 1945. It kept proving itself. It served through the Korean War. where once again it showed its worth against the bolt-action rifles of Chinese and North Korean troops. In the early years of that conflict, waves of Chinese soldiers charged American lines, echoing the old banzai attacks of the Pacific. But this time, Garands, and the automatic weapons supporting them, stopped those assaults cold. The rifle remained standard issue until it was gradually replaced by the M14 in the late 1950s and early 60s. Then came a twist of history no one could have predicted. In the 1950s, the United States rearmed Japan's new self-defense forces with none other than the M1 Garand. The very weapon that had once torn through Japanese ranks now became the rifle Japanese soldiers trained with. They were finally experiencing firsthand the kind of firepower their fathers had faced on islands like Guadalcanal and Saipan. About 150,000 M1 Garands were delivered to Japan through American military assistance programs. When Japanese veterans were interviewed in the 1960s, many of them spoke of the same thing: American firepower. Saburo Sakai, Japan's top surviving fighter ace, summed it up perfectly. We could match American courage, we could match American tactics, but we could never match American firepower. Every GI with his automatic rifle was worth 3 of our soldiers. Today, both rifles, the M1 Garand and the Arisaka, are prized collectibles, though for very different reasons. The Civilian Marksmanship Program, CMP, has sold over 500,000 surplus Garands to American shooters since it began, making it one of the most common and beloved historical rifles in the country. That signature ping of the Garand's empty clip has become iconic, heard in countless war movies, television shows, and video games. General George S. Patton's famous line still holds true. The M1 Garand remains the greatest battle implement ever devised. Even today, modern shooting competitions feature Garand matches, and the rifle still delivers impressive accuracy by any standard. The Japanese Arisaka rifles, meanwhile, have their own legacy. Collectors especially value those that still bear the intact imperial chrysanthemum crest, the symbol of the emperor. Since most of those markings were ground off before Japan's surrender, unaltered rifles are rare and highly prized. Modern tests have confirmed what gunsmiths long suspected. The Arisaka action is incredibly strong, even stronger than the Mauser or Springfield actions. But no amount of strength could compensate for the limitations of a bolt-action rifle in a semi-automatic age. Remarkably, both rifles have continued to show up in modern conflicts. M1 Garands have been spotted in the Middle East, leftovers from old military aid programs. Arisakas, astonishingly, have turned up in the hands of insurgents in Afghanistan and Myanmar, proof of their durability even if their design is long obsolete. And yet, for all the history that followed, it still comes back to that October night in 1942, on the ridges near Henderson Field. Private Robert Young Deere of the 164th Infantry Regiment and countless other young Americans showed what semi-automatic fire could do when it mattered most. That night, they proved a truth that still defines modern warfare. Technology and industrial power can decide battles, no matter how brave the soldier. The math told the story. The M1 Garand fired 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute compared to the Arisaka's 15 to 20. It carried 8 rounds per reload instead of 5. It cycled automatically rather than by hand. It could pour out a steady stream of accurate fire that stopped a charge cold, while the enemy struggled to work a bolt and find their sight picture again. Those numbers multiplied across thousands of firefights, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, and they shaped the outcome of the Pacific War itself. And somewhere in that chaos, Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, leading his men forward through the jungle on October 24, 1942, lifted his Type 38 Arisaka and charged straight into history. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto never lived to see the dawn. His Type 38 Arisaka, a rifle known for its accuracy, smooth action, and sturdy design, was found beside his body after the battle. Inside the magazine were 3 unfired rounds. He had managed to squeeze off only 2 shots before being cut down, advancing barely 100 yards into the storm of semi-automatic fire from the M1 Garands. All around him lay dozens of his men, most with nearly full magazines still in their rifles. They never had the chance to return effective fire. The sheer volume of American rounds had erased any opportunity for skill or courage to make a difference. The story of the M1 Garand versus the Arisaka isn't just about two rifles. It's about a larger truth of the war in the Pacific. Bravery and determination, no matter how great, couldn't overcome the mathematics of firepower. By the end of the war, the United States had produced 5.4 million M1 Garands, enough to ensure that nearly every American infantryman carried a semi-automatic rifle into battle. Japan, though it had turned out over 6.5 million Arisaka rifles, never broke free from the limitations of bolt-action technology. No amount of courage could match the simple arithmetic of 8 shots against 5, of automatic cycling versus manual reloading. General George S. Patton's famous praise for the Garand as the greatest battle implement ever devised wasn't an exaggeration. It was a statement of fact, backed by hard numbers and bloody experience. From the steamy jungles of Guadalcanal, where it first proved its worth, to the black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, where Marines used it to smash through fortified bunkers. From the rain-soaked misery of Cape Gloucester to the ruined cities that might have awaited invasion in Japan itself, the M1 Garand was more than a weapon. It was a force multiplier, a tool that gave ordinary soldiers extraordinary power in the most brutal theater of the most terrible war the world had ever seen. That sharp, metallic ping of an empty clip being ejected became the sound of American victory. Each one meant that 8 more bullets had done their work, 8 chances that no enemy would reach the line, 8 steps closer to the end of the war. Against it, the Arisaka, for all its craftsmanship and strength, was a rifle from another era, fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's tools. In the final analysis, the Pacific War wasn't won by courage alone. It was won by the relentless combination of industrial power and technological superiority. The M1 Garand stood as the clearest symbol of that advantage at the level of the individual soldier. Every GI and Marine carrying an M1 had, in effect, the firepower of 3 enemy riflemen. That edge couldn't be undone by training, discipline, or even the fiercest warrior spirit. The Japanese soldier, brave, dedicated, and skillful though he was, could only work his bolt so fast. And in the modern world, rate of fire multiplied by accuracy meant survival. Today, the Arisaka rifles rest quietly in museums and private collections, respected for their craftsmanship and the courage of the men who carried them. The M1 Garand, too, has passed into history, though many still fire flawlessly on American ranges, a living echo of another time. But during those desperate years across the Pacific, one rifle proved itself beyond question. The semi-automatic Garand made every American soldier a base of fire unto himself, and multiplied across the vast island battlefields. That advantage helped secure Allied victory. In the end, the last word didn't belong to courage or tradition. It belonged to mechanical precision, to the cold, reliable rhythm of gas-operated fire. 8 rounds, 1 pull of the trigger each, until that unmistakable ping signaled it was time to reload and keep fighting.